What is going on, you guys? I want to talk to you today about why I think the Clone Wars is absolutely coming to X-Wing and possibly even other games, but specifically X-Wing 2.0. So, a lot of people have asked me about, do I think this is happening? This has been talked about for years, ever since X-Wing's been a thing. As time progresses, more and more of the Star Wars fan base are starting to be people who grew up and the prequels were the first movies that they've seen, and now this entire generation of people are, money-paying customers who are ready to buy some merchandise, right? Because for the longest time, they were just kids, and we, the adults, were like, no, the original trilogy, the prequels are terrible and stuff. And I've said it time and time again lately, the prequels have started to grow on me, especially from a wargaming perspective, because there's a lot of content in here that would be perfect for games like Legion, Armada, and X-Wing, as well as they were prevalent in other games. Look at Epic Duels, full of prequel stuff. Awesome game, by the way. Check out Epic Duels. It's out of print. If you can find a copy or somebody who has it, play it. You'll love it. Great with a group. That being said, I do think they are... have at least opened the door to the prequels, to the Clone War era stuff. And I'm going to talk about why I don't think that... I'm not actually saying that this is absolutely coming soon, but I think they've opened the door for it, so it's totally capable to come at any given point now. And so that's really exciting to me, because when this shows up in X-Wing, maybe it's a chance for it to show up in other games too. So why do I think X-Wing 2.0 is getting Clone War stuff? Well, first off, multiple factions, right? We already know they're splitting off the Resistance and the First Order into their own separate factions. This in itself isn't a giveaway, but what it does is it means for a multiple faction game. Now, how could that directly apply to, to these factions? Well, for one thing, it's a little bit easier to just say, oh, well, the good guys can all be like in X-Wing 1.0, right? When Resistance and First Order came out, you could easily say, well, the bad guys are compatible with the bad guys, and the good guys are compatible with the good guys. So Resistance and Rebels, they kind of just pushed them all together and merged them together. You couldn't really do that in the Clone Wars because the lines were far more blurry, right? Because we know the Old Republic became the Empire, and so their stuff was basically the same. You saw clone troopers, stormtroopers, a lot of the people stayed on. Tarkin was, were there. Wolf Yularen was there. All these people just transferred over. But the problem is, during the Clone Wars, the Republic were the good guys, and you had the Jedi working with them, and so it was all mixed up. So it was not so clear. And in the droid, the CIS. They were the bad guys, and so you couldn't just group them with the rebels. You can't have General Grievous fighting next to Luke Skywalker on the same side. You can't just put good guys and bad guys together, because it just doesn't work that way. It's complicated, and so the only way to really do Clone Wars stuff in a game that also has Galactic Civil War stuff is to divide them into multi-factions. And X-Wing now, granted X-Wing kind of did that with Scum, but Scum, you could argue they were in their own thing entirely. But now, with the way X-Wing is doing the sequel trilogy factions, they have opened the door for Clone Wars factions. And that is important because, and whether or not that was their intent, maybe they were just future-proofing it, which, again, is also opening the door. And maybe their intent may not be to add this now. Their intent may be to wait until maybe another movie comes out set in the Clone Wars era time frame at some point. Like maybe they're going to do a Grievous movie at some point or something like that. Probably not, but maybe a Plagueis. A Plagueis movie could potentially have something to do with that. That would be interesting too. But before I get off topic, my point is, whenever the time happens to be, whether this is something they announce at Gen Con or whether this is something they announce 3 Gen Cons from now, I don't know. But what they're doing in X-Wing 2.0 is laying the groundwork and future-proofing the game such that this can become a reality. And the reason why it might be sooner rather than later is because of the fact that they got some new factions they need to come out with, Resistance and the First Order, and they're going to be a little bit light on ships. So if you're looking for some factions to also be light on ships, brand new factions would also be similarly light on ships. So it may be a time to say, okay, here's all these other factions, and if you want more balanced gameplay, try Resistance versus the CIS, because they're all both only going to have like 6 ships available after the first 6 months of them being out. Something like that. Possible. It's possible. So what are some other reasons? I've got more reasons. I've got a lot more reasons. Okay, so you may have seen Team Covenant's interview, and with Andrew Navarro, they were talking about, X-Wing 2.0 when it first came out, and I feel like, these guys obviously get a heads up on stuff, and I'm not mad at them for that. That's great because they're bringing us quality content. I'm, big fan of Team Covenant. They do great stuff, but I feel like, if all right, let me try to find the way to word this without it being too crazy. I feel like they have some inside information, or maybe the questions are screened ahead of time or something, because all of us, like if any of you were in that room, because there was a point when he asked, I'm like, okay, so X-Wing's gonna be, gonna have 5 factions. What about 20 factions? And Andrew Navarro was like, I'm not so sure about that, But like, if you had the chance to ask them that, why wouldn't you have just asked about Clone Wars factions, right? So, obviously, at some point, maybe that question was asked and they said, hey, we can't talk about that right now. I just feel like the way that he asked, well, if you can do 5, can you do 20? And they said, why wouldn't you have just asked a question that was actually on the tip of everybody's tongue? Well, what about Clone Wars factions? The fact that he didn't ask that, like, it felt like it was deliberately omitted. To me, maybe trying to read between the lines here, this looks like this was almost soft confirmation that it's at least on their radar, but not necessarily next in the queue, but such that they like, hey, let's not comment on that publicly right now. So can you not ask us about clone? Like I just imagine, like a pre-interview Q&A, like, okay, so we want to ask you about this. Oh, we shouldn't ask about that because that's meant to be a surprise. Okay, got it. Like, these guys never ask, and honestly, and I would be in the same thing. All right, if I get, if I interview these guys, I'm not going to be like, so tell me what's the next expansion. Like, 'cause obviously they're not going to tell you. That's going to be released when the time is right. So it would be almost rude to ask that. But the fact that they did ask around it makes me think that it was a sign. Again, maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Let me know what you think in the comments. All right, so next up, we have some factions, some new mechanics that are coming out in X-Wing 2.0. And a lot of you guys have talked about this in the comments below, so, some of you, I think, were right there with me. But, some of the droid pilots, and I'm using the Star Viper here as an example. You've got Zizor on the right here who's got focus, because he's humanoid. But then you've got droid pilots who have calculate instead of focus. And there's not that many droid pilots in this game. So if, the fact that they added calculate almost seems like, again, future-proofing for the possibility of having a lot more droid pilots. What faction is full of droid pilots? CIS, the Confederate of Independent Systems, or Confederacy of Independent Systems. They're full of calculate. So you're future-proofing a faction full of droids. None of these things that I have are proof that this is happening, but they certainly are laying the groundwork for it. So whether or not that's what they're planning to do right now, they're certainly allowing that to become a reality. The same thing goes with the Force. All right, you don't have that many Force-sensitive pilots in this game. So Force-sensitive pilots are going to be huge, especially in the Old Republic. You've got a ton of them. Now, this is less of a thing for the when you compare it to the droids, because you really needed calculate if you're going to do a whole droid faction. With the relatively smaller amount of droid pilots you have, you could have just done some special keywords for their abilities. But Force is more broad, but it's still a good idea, and it's definitely future proofing because the Force is definitely a part of Star Wars. But this would definitely tie in. The Rebels have a couple of Force pilots. The Empire has a couple of Force pilots, and I'm using Asajj here because Asajj is a character that would appear in multiple factions, and that's fine. But they said, the Scum has very few Force pilots, and that's one of the things that's going to give them kind of a niche And I'm thinking, yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. But then maybe the Old Republic is going to have a ton of Force pilots, and that's going to be one of the things that gives them a unique feel, and compared to the CIS, which is going to have a ton of calculates, which is going to give them a unique feel. And the thing is, CIS can have some Force pilots too. You can have Grievous and Asajj Ventress, and and you can General Krell, maybe even, you can have a couple in that, because that just makes sense. I don't know if you would have Night Sisters though. That'd be interesting. So yes, we have that. And another thing. So here's and I got a couple more things, and these are just extra little things that are kind of like having them lay the groundwork. You got rid of the salvaged astromech type. Now again, this is me reading between the lines. Again, one of the only reasons they needed salvaged astromech was to kind of restrict, we want the scum to have astromechs, but we don't want them to have access to all of these that we didn't say were like rebel only or whatever. So it's, so we're just making a whole separate type. And sure, I get that. I feel like it's kind of like the same kind of distinction between missiles and torpedoes, right? Like, well, we have to make a separate type so that one ship doesn't have access to this other one. Okay, that's fine. But in the case of astromechs, now they're all just astromechs, so you don't have salvaged astromech anymore. But they're now all going to be restricted by who they want to be able to use them. Okay, great, that's fine. But that also opens the door for a lot of Old Republic ships took astromechs, and so now you have no problem giving the Old Republic access to astromechs. Some that might synergize well, that would have been broken if they were, could go across faction lines or whatever. But the fact that they're restricting so many things to specific factions, including universal things like astromechs, is just another thing that's going to make doing Old Republic, for example, much easier. Now, and this is, the Slave one is another example of this, but this one is the one that first really opened my eyes to it. Because when they were showing off some of these cards, they showed you the HWK's title, and because that one can go on Scum and on Rebels. Cool, got it. And then you look at the Slave one, and it's Scum only, and this one, when you look at it, looks like just about every title is restricted. But I'm thinking, well, why does it? But the Slave one stood out to me because the Slave one used to be Imperial, and I'm thinking, why is it Scum only? Because there is no Imperial Slave 1 at this point. There isn't one. So they don't... It's like they almost didn't need to make titles restricted to faction. There's just not much reason to. There's very few titles. There's very few ships that are multi-faction now, especially with the Skurg being pulled back into being exclusively Scum. So, what other faction could even potentially ever have a Slave 1? Well, I can think of one. I can think of a little guy named Jango Fett. And so in that case, this would actually be a real, a thing. And so while this is not proof, because the same thing is the same situation here is true for a lot of the other titles. They're restricted by a faction and a ship combined. I think that's just another way of them future-proofing this. So if they do come out with Jango Fett and his fire spray, they can give him a title that's specifically balanced for that ship in that faction. It may be similar to this, but it doesn't have to be the same. The same ship 20 years later doesn't have to be, or 30 years later, doesn't have to have the exact same specifications. Actually, to tell you the truth, it could be a better ship. Jango Fett's Slave 1 could be way better than this one. It all depends on, first off, how it needs to function in game balance, but it's a new ship, so a new ship should perform better than an old ship. But it all depends on what kind of modifications have been done to it and how they want to address all of that in the canon and what's appropriate. But I guess the point is they've definitely opened the doors. They've future-proofed this game such to allow Clone Wars. I don't know if that's their goal, but that combined with that interview not having that key question, but then asking a similar question, I feel like they're nudging us, and I feel like they're kind of telling us, hey guys, all this stuff is possible now, wink, so we'll see when the in-flight report happens if they want to announce that at Gen Con. I think if anything, maybe we'll get a look at the Resistance and the First Order and how they're going to look, and maybe some other new ships that are going to get done, but I think it's entirely possible that we could see the announcement for Clone Wars era stuff. And you know, maybe if you guys find yourself talking to somebody from FFG, just ask them, see what they have to say. You know, maybe, you know, if they're like, oh, I can't talk about that yet. You know, I don't know. But I'm certainly interested. So I think you know, and they've opened the groundwork for it at least. So whether or not that's on the, you know, on the plans going forward or not, right now, it's certainly a possibility. And I think it's a good idea to have the possibility for a lot of factions, because you've got so many new movies, so many new TV series, and so many things coming out right now that there could be like separate factions altogether. There could be the Yuzan Vong, or it probably won't be exactly them, but there could be some kind of equivalent to the Yuzan Vong show up in one of these other trilogies, maybe in Rian Johnson's trilogy or something like that. And now you have the ability for all, you know, for all of that to come in without impacting everything else, since there's so much faction restriction here. So that's what I think. I would love to hear what you guys think. There is another round of the giveaway going on right now, so if you'd like to enter to win an expansion of your choice in the form of a $20 Cool Stuff gift card, you can do that by enter that by becoming a subscriber and leaving a comment on this or one of my other videos. It's as simple as that. I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.